Well, hi there, folks. I'm hoping that you can hear me and hoping that our presentation shows up also. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Rachel Vasak. I am the Executive Director for the Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association in the Bellingham-Whatcom County area. I'm excited to be here today, along with my colleague Jason Lundgren, to talk with you about the Regional Fishery Enhancement Group program and our story. We've been working to engage communities throughout Washington State for 30 years. And I want to scroll through the slides. There we go. I do also want to acknowledge that the 14 regional fishery enhancement groups work on the ancestral and current homelands of tribes throughout the state of Washington. The RFEG program was started in 1990 by the Washington State Legislature. This program was specifically designed to involve local community members in the process of salmon recovery. Citizen volunteers, private landowners, and many more through this community involvement can take action to help salmon. Since then, the RFEGs have been building a movement for salmon recovery by actively engaging diverse communities all across the state and providing meaningful ways for tens of thousands of community members to take action to help salmon in their communities. Our motto is, our program is statewide, but our priorities are local. Each one of the 14 groups is an independent nonprofit organization. We have our own mission and goals, and those are driven by local salmon recovery priorities. Basically, wherever there are salmon, there's an RFEG trying to help them by working to build community investment in salmon recovery. Today, we'll share a few examples of the types of work that we do across the state. So I think it's important to recognize that in all of the different focus areas for regional fishery enhancement groups, that community involvement is woven throughout everything that we do. The RFEGs lead habitat restoration projects. We work to remove fish passage barriers, remove dams, do in-stream restoration projects, including adding large woody debris, rerouting channels, large-scale projects. Yet community involvement is woven throughout all of those. In the past 30 years, we've completed over 4,000 projects. We've removed 944 fish passage barriers and opened up 1,316 miles of habitat to salmon. These projects include local, state, federal, tribal, and private sector partnerships, and volunteerism is a critical component of most of these restoration projects. Monitoring is another important priority for the RFEGs. We coordinate hundreds of active citizen scientists across the state. Many of the RFEGs partner with local hatcheries and coordinate volunteers to help with fish releases and nutrient enhancement efforts. To date, over 86 million fish have been released with volunteer support through the RFEG program. Education programs include award-winning curriculum and innovative programming for students in the K-12 range, also college programming. And community outreach includes events like movies, speakers, trivia events, salmon sighting, outreach booths, salmon art, and so many more examples of how we work to celebrate salmon and engage our community members in those processes. Woven throughout all of this is that community engagement piece. Work parties are a really great example of this. We've had work parties that draw over 500 community volunteers in one day to plant trees to help local creeks. In 30 years, we have collected more than 1,655,000 volunteer hours to support salmon recovery. So why salmon? This is not a surprise to any of you, but many people in our communities don't realize how important salmon are and that they need our help. As human population increases, salmon population decreases. The RFEGs really work to focus on the why within our communities. We believe that people in the Pacific Northwest care about salmon for three main reasons. Our economy is tied in many ways to salmon. The culture of the Pacific Northwest is defined by salmon. And our environment depends on salmon. From orcas to otters, over 167 species of wildlife depend on salmon. Without salmon, I can't imagine the trophic cascade that would invariably occur. I think we can all agree that we need salmon and that salmon need our help. When I think about helping salmon, I can't imagine us being successful without a significant grassroots community involvement. So what is community involvement and why does it matter? I want to start by telling you why salmon matter to me. In 1995, I was a college student. I was studying geology. I really didn't care about salmon. I took a course on fluvial geomorphology, and in that course, I discovered the branch of geology that could be used to help the environment, and I could see results on a human timescale instead of a geologic timescale. It was perfect for me. While I was doing survey work at a local restoration project, the opportunity to volunteer to plant some trees came up, and I decided to help out. On a rainy spring Saturday, I joined a handful of volunteers and planted a dozen seedlings along a newly created channel in an open field of reed canary grass. I never thought this small act would change my life. Today, when I visit that site, it's an amazing experience. The canopy is lush. The trees I planted there as a volunteer are now sprouting seedlings of their own. I went there recently to check on the baby salmon. I could see hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny little coho fries swimming in the clean, clear water, dappled with sunshine filtered through the increasingly mature canopy. That shade will increase as the trees leaf out, and this summer the water will stay cool enough to shelter the juvenile salmon. There will be plenty of food because the riparian area provides good habitat for the insects too. This is an area that many people said could never support salmon, and what an oasis it has become. Today, when crew members and volunteers all over the state plant each tree, we are starting that same process over. And many of the RFEGs host community work parties like the one pictured here. That means thousands of volunteers planting tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of trees. It takes time for those seedlings, planted with love and hope, to grow to the point that they change habitat, but they do. These trees will be creating habitat like I described above in the next decade and beyond all over the state. Clearly, this experience changed my life. Each community member who's engaged in work parties like this leaves being changed as well. Each volunteer that takes time to plant a tree has a personal investment in this outcome. And this is what building a movement is all about: grassroots, or in our case, tree roots involvement. Yet there are other ways to create investment. For example, the Skagit Fishery Enhancement Group trains community volunteers to conduct spawner surveys. Volunteers track growth and survival through vegetation monitoring and riparian plantings. They do juvenile fish monitoring and snorkel surveys, and do macroinvertebrate monitoring as well. Another example of work through the RFEG program is the Community Action Training School, currently hosted by Sound Salmon Solutions. This seeks to empower community members to be more effective at being the change we want to see in the world. And now I want to introduce Jason Lundgren. He's the director of the Cascade Columbia Regional Fishery Enhancement Group, and he'll share a couple more examples of community involvement with you.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that. And thanks, everybody, for attending this session. It sure would be nice to look out and see faces, but we're making do. As Rachel and Shauna, our cohort to the south of the Lower Columbia, developed this presentation, it was fun to really stop and think about the work that we do. And, you know, when we're writing grants and reporting, developing annual reports and things, we always think about education and outreach as its own separate program. But through developing this presentation, it was nice to think about really how everything we do in the community touches people and brings them into the fold. I'd like to first acknowledge a couple of my staff that actually do this work. I'm sort of taking credit for their work today, but Jen Herdman, Kristen Kirkby are the people that are in the schools and getting citizens out in the watershed, touching the dirt and measuring water in some of our streams. In North Central Washington, Rachel, I think you can advance. Oh, here you are, you're right. In North Central Washington, we're really fortunate to be working on a few very cool programs. Some of them are ours that we've created, and others are partnerships with entities in our region. We have schools for salmon. Most of you have heard of Salmon in the Classroom or something along those lines. It's been around for a long time and many entities have touched it. I have bounced into schools and seen kids participate in this program. Part of the program is fish dissections, and you can literally hear and see these kids' minds blowing up. Like when they first see a salmon and they're touching it and they have a scalpel in their hand and it's amazing. Or when they're looking at the fish tank at their juvenile salmon that they're growing to release in the streams, it's the first thing they want to do when they come to school. And you know, being somebody that sits behind the desk most of the time, it is so powerful to be in the classroom with these kids and watching the lights just going off in their brains. So anyway, I want to talk about a couple of these programs. The Schools for Salmon thing, I think all of you have probably been involved with this at some time. I know in 5th grade, I raised salmon in our classroom. We didn't get to go out to the stream to release them, but I was in Olympia a couple of years ago meeting with our legislatures, touting our accomplishments and how wonderful we are. And a local legislature from Chelan told me that he remembers doing salmon in the classroom, and that really touched him. And so I thought that link was really cool to experience. It was something that we had in common. And to think that whoever was doing that program 20, 30 years ago, you know, never would have guessed that someday that person, that student, was going to be sitting in Olympia making big decisions on salmon's behalf. Jen and other partners in our watershed also created this Watching Over Our Watershed program. It's a lot of what Rachel and Sheila had talked about, where kids are getting outside, they're monitoring environmental health and evaluating habitat for fish, and really tying the things that they're learning in the classroom through our curricula with on the ground. And they're also getting experiences, getting a taste of what it might be like to be a technician or a fisheries biologist someday. Kids in the Creek is not ours. Cascadia Conservation District leads that program, but we partner with them. And it's similar to the other programs that we've been talking about. It's getting kids outside, getting them in nature. They're measuring tree canopy, they're measuring stream temperatures, and they're identifying macroinvertebrates. And we talk about this, you know, we're a little bit far removed in a conference like this, but those things are really impactful. And, you know, they're going to be talking to their parents when they go home and have dinner. And, you know, as Sheila demonstrated, some of these people end up working in this field and becoming, you know, our support system in the community. Next slide, please. So this is a program in the Lower Columbia with the Lower Columbia Fish Enhancement Group. So I'm less familiar with it personally, but again, it's getting kids outside. They're learning about salmon ecology, conservation, habitat restoration through hands-on interactive engagement. We're often now held to a pretty high standard with these programs, doing the science, technology, and engineering requirements that the school districts are increasingly being pressured to implement. And so we're weaving all of our programs into the expectations of the local school districts and the state school programs. Oh boy, all right, I'm almost out of time. I'm gonna probably just end it on this slide then. Derby Creek is a small, pretty typical stream. It's been beat up by agriculture, development, you name it, water withdrawals. We started 6 years ago working with one landowner to replace one fish barrier. There's 17 of them. We have since completed 9 and developed all these incredible relationships. We've had AmeriCorps, my board members, students from the Wenatchee Valley Technical College out monitoring this stream. And it has become a legacy for our organization in a way that I want to do restoration. I want to invest resources and develop long-term relationships. This stream has a brighter future because so many people now are taking ownership and watching over it. We get phone calls every other week from a neighbor that are seeing fish in the stream or calling out one of their neighbors upstream for doing something that's questionable. So it's been really fun, and we hope to have those kind of focused projects and efforts and bringing the stewardship element into the front and center. I am probably out of time, but I just want to reiterate the themes from this morning. We're running out of time for these fish, and we need to show up every day. We need to be motivated. We need to be focused. We need to be bold. We don't have time on our side, so that's my call to action. That's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you very much.